Hello and welcome back to Loud Creations. Today I am going to talk about the first part of my strawberries and cream mead that I am working on. And I wanted to just go over what the first steps were to get it into primary fermentation. You can see it's right behind me. I started it yesterday and it is bubbling away. I'm also going to be step feeding the mead. So in this video, I will give it its first little meal of Fermade O, which in the form of a quarter teaspoon. I have said this in my other videos. There is a more technical method to step feeding. I've read, all the resources I could find on it, and I've decided I'm going to do it my way, which might not be the right way, but it seems to be working for me. I do a quarter teaspoon for a gallon of mead after 24 hours, 48 hours, and then 36 hours. And then on the seventh day, I add another quarter teaspoon. Whether or not I'm doing it right, my guess is I'm technically not. So I highly recommend looking up, if you're interested in step feeding your mead, doing your own research and doing what works best for you and your mead. That said, I'm going to go ahead and just dive into how I made the mead for primary fermentation. Here we go. I used, for primary, there's a debate on whether or not you want to have strawberries in primary. I'm going to go ahead and do both primary and secondary. See what happens. Every strawberry mead I've made, I did put the strawberries in primary and it tasted fine to me. So for this one, I'm doing primary and secondary, and the next one I do, I'll probably just do secondary just to see if there's any taste difference and see what I prefer. But this time I went ahead and I took 2 pounds of frozen strawberries and I set them out to thaw. They weren't entirely thawed by the time I had a window to record the video. So I filled up my handy dandy electric teapot up to its max, which is just under 8 cups or half a gallon. So I went ahead and set that going. And while I was heating up the water, I went ahead and put 3 pounds of raw honey. And once the water was boiling, I poured the water over the honey and stirred it up really well to make sure it was completely mixed. So I stirred it up really well, made sure everything was mixed in. There's no honey dripping off the spoon when I lift it out of the water, and which tells me it's completely melted and mixed. I went ahead and I spooned in my frozen strawberries to the hot must just to help them melt a little bit more, make sure they got completely thawed. I put them in hot water. I then, just a caveat here, normally I would be using a mesh bag here so that I wouldn't have so much strawberry plant debris floating around when I try to rack it, but I didn't have a mesh bag available, so I just put them straight in there. I will be using a mesh bag when I rack it, which will be in the second video. So anyway, strawberries go in to the hot water. I let them sit there for a minute, and then I got my handy dandy potato masher and started mashing away just to break down the strawberries a little bit more and get those juices out. I took a little bit of the honey water strawberry mixture and I put it into a jar and added half a teaspoon of Go Firm. Stirred that up and set it aside for a few minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I put another third of a gallon in to try to get to a full gallon. Now I was eyeballing it. I put cold water in to cool off the must so that I can put the yeast in sooner. And all of this water, just so you know, is filtered water because the type of water that you use can affect the flavor of your mead. So I use the filtered water that we have here. And I went ahead and stirred that up really well. I stirred it around to add oxygen to the must, which the yeast need. When they're in their primary fermentation, they need that oxygen. So stir, stir, stir. I've tried the drill method for whatever reason. I don't know if it's the drill attachment that I have. Let me see if I can show. There we go. I have one of these things, which you can attach to your drill, and it will oxygenate your must and stir it up really well. I don't know if I just got a really cheap one or what's going on, but this part does not go in my drill very well, so I just stir it by hand, and I stir for maybe 5 minutes. Back to our regular programming. So I set the Go Firm aside. I added cold water back into my must to get to approximately a gallon of liquid, stirred it up really well. And once I had that done, it was time to pitch the yeast into my Go Firm slurry, or make a yeast slurry, or I added the yeast to the strawberry juice and Go Firm. I did that. I had half a packet of EC1118 and I just tossed the whole thing in there. I didn't measure it out this time. I gave it a good stir and I set it aside. Now, I did this once the liquid in my jar had gotten to body temperature, because if it was too hot, it would just kill the yeast, and then where would we be? We'd have to add more yeast, and I didn't want to do that. So I added the yeast to make my little slurry, and I set it aside for 5 or 10 minutes until it looked like the yeast were waking up. And at that point, while that was happening, I went ahead and added some lemon zest, and I would say approximately the zest of a third or a half of a lemon. Once the yeast slurry looked ready to go and my must had cooled down to an appropriate temperature, I pitched the yeast slurry in and gave it a good stir yet again. Next step would be to take a gravity reading. Now, I think I put a little bit more water in there than I should have, because the original gravity for this one is 1.090, which is just fine by me. I went ahead and wrote that down along with the date and what type of mead I'm making, and added it to the top, to the lid, so that I can remember what happened. That's very good to, document everything. The final step is to put your lid on, snapping it into place, making sure it's completely closed, and adding an airlock. And my airlock had some sanitization fluid in it. And here we are now, 24 hours later, and I can see it bubbling away, which makes me happy. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my first little bit of Fermade O. Almost said Go Firm. I get the two mix up. Fermade O is the yeast nutrient. Here's my big bag of Fermade O, and I'm going to go ahead and move this. I don't know if it's going to be in the shot, but this lid is really difficult to take off. This is why I don't use this very much, because I don't want to deal with taking. When I say very difficult, I mean mildly difficult. Enough to make me not want to use it. Okay. Now, if I had a spoon with me, I would give this a good stir. What I'm going to do is add my Fermade O, and then I'm going to swish it around with the lid on, because I did not clean a spoon, and that's what's happening here. Okay, so I have my 1/4 teaspoon. I'm just going to sprinkle that in there. This is all bubbly looking. I don't know if you can see that, but it's all foamy on top, and looks like the yeast are pretty darn happy, and I like it that way. So we're going to snap this back on. Whoa, bubbles coming out of the top. And I'm just going to swish it. Hopefully, oh yeah, there's You can see the stuff coming out the top. My star san is just super bubbly. Okay, so giant bubbles. Hopefully the yeast are thankful for that food, and they will continue on their journey creating alcohol for me. So the other part of this recipe I will be doing in my second video when I rack off of the fruit. I'm going to go ahead and take another couple of pounds of strawberries that have been frozen and then thawed and add those in along with the vanilla bean that's split. And depending on how far in the fermentation process we are, I might stabilize it. I'm only going to wait about a week. I don't want to keep it on the fruit for more than a week. So we'll see. If I can get to it in a week. It might be 2 weeks. So I'm going to put this into the first racking. I assume I'm going to be racking this a couple of times just because I have all of that fruit in there too. That is going to be kind of a mess. I'm going to try to get another mesh bag before I go into secondary. But yeah, in secondary, I'm going to just be adding my vanilla, my more strawberries that have been frozen and thawed, and possibly my lactose powder. Okay, so I've fed my mead. I'm going to give it another 1/4 teaspoon at the 48-hour mark and the 36-hour mark. And then on the 7th day, I do it one more time. I will probably check in on this. I might rack it off the strawberries around a week instead of waiting the 2+ weeks that I usually wait with primary fermentation, just to get it off the strawberries. So that will be in my second video. I'll also be adding the other ingredients to make it more of a strawberries and cream, not just the strawberries. In my research that I did online, this stuff, lactose powder popped up in a lot of the forums that I read when I was looking for how to make something taste creamy. Lactose and vanilla is what I settled on, and so that's what I will be adding into secondary. The lactose will probably be the last thing that I add, depending on when I stabilize the mead, and then I'll add this. Or I'll add this and then stabilize. This is a non-fermentable sugar, so I believe you kind of have to use a lot to get the sweetness that you would get with honey, but I'm going to just use this to sweeten it and let this ferment out, I believe. But if it gets to a point that where I like it, I'm going to stabilize it. I'm just rambling on now. So I will be back in a couple weeks to do the next step with this mead. I hope this video is useful, and I will see you next time.